Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. As you can see, I am going to be reviewing the McFarlane Toys Avatar The Last Airbender Appa. So this is probably the most exciting thing from the entire first wave of McFarlane. Including the 7-inch stuff, including the Aang statue, this Appa, the sort of animal scale figure, I think is the most exciting one for sure. Just because it's like, wow, finally a company is doing an Appa that is not one of the original Toyline Appas. So yeah, let's get into this. It's obviously the kind of biggest thing available for the 5-inch scale. So here, just as a comparison with the box, is Katara next to Appa here. But we'll get into that more when we have him out of the box. So yeah, before we start ripping the box apart, I guess, let's take a look at this. Avatar Legends packaging, of course, with the new sort of style that I think most official stuff is going to have. This sort of navy and sort of more sand colored stuff going on here. Here's the back of the box, nice image of Appa. The description for Appa here says, Aang Sky Bison is his constant companion and also his primary means of transportation. Appa uses airbending to fly, creating powerful gusts of wind with his tail. He is extremely loyal and loving. So yeah, pretty cool there. Just highlighting that, yes, this is a Sky Bison Appa, one of the, original benders here for Air. That's cool. So yeah, other than that, like, is there anything else to talk about? The bottom is just pretty normal. Same with the sides. So yeah, a bit more work to do here with regards to opening this, but we'll see how it goes as we start to cut through this tape and so on. So if we open that up, that just shows us a twist tie thing here, which we will just cut through. So, oh yeah, okay, so he's attached in here. We can just pull it out. Okay, so yeah, that gets rid of the box. It just leaves the packaging here. So you can see here more clearly, he comes in obviously two parts here. The tail is a separate piece because it's a quite long bit to add onto the end. I suppose to keep the packaging to a minimum, they just did it this way. Pretty cool. Like, just it's a relatively hefty chunk of plastic here just for the tail. You can see a big kind of connection point there. Nice detailing on it, but we'll get to that in a second. Yeah, we have a few more of these to kind of cut through. That gets rid of that. And then, what? Two more here on the back. Okay, so yeah, that gets that out of the way. Just a kind of brief thing on this sort of inner packaging. It's just, sort of, mountain landscape, airbender kind of landscape there. So pretty nice overall. And then just got a plastic insert here. So I guess the head, which I believe is like one of the only pieces of articulation on the figure, so that the head doesn't move too much. It's just got the plastic here, I guess. And I guess because it's a sort of like open box just on the shelf wherever you'd be getting it from, it's probably also to protect people from just maybe like taking the head, which I believe with the Space Jam figures recently has been a thing that I've seen online. But why would people steal Appa's head? And yeah, the big thing now, having just the kind of core of the figure out here, it's a hefty chunk of plastic. It's way heavier than you think it would be, because just as a brief comparison, I happen to have some of the animal scale figures from the original Avatar toy lines from back from like 2005, 2006. So here, as you can see, is a sort of similarly sized figure here of the Komodo Rhino, of course. And this, to me, weighs about half of what this weighs. So obviously, this is, I guess, sort of hollow ultimately in a lot of places. This is quite hefty and chunky here. So here is the tail connection. So let's actually put this on. So you can see it's basically just like a ball joint on a stem, and then there's the ball socket. So we just connect it in, and there we go. Appa is whole again. And I just think it looks really, really cool. I don't have an Appa figure in my collection outside of the Funko Pop, which is obviously nowhere near the right scale or anything like that. So let's just take a look at this thing. Like I said, the big thing I note just immediately is the weight. It's very, very heavy. You would not want to be throwing this thing around. And the big thing here is just the detailing on it. Like the sculpting to get across that, you know, Appa's covered in fur is really cool to see. That it's not just a sort of minor texture on the figure. No, it's full on. Like you can tell, like it's almost like individual like sculpts of the hair throughout the whole figure. It gives it a really nice look. It's obviously, because it's like a physical object here and not just a piece of like, you know, 2D animation or whatever, it has to have a little bit more detail than it does in the animation. But I think the accuracy of this, it just makes it feel like, yeah, this is really cool. And it's meant to go with what McFarlane is going for, because like I covered with Katara, the texture on the clothing, even the fact that like her hair has texture, which like they typically don't do. For instance, like on the Funko Pops, like they don't do texture for the hair, but they are here just to give it that extra layer of detail. So let's take a look at the saddle here. Now, this is probably the biggest problem with this figure, because like just looking at it next to Katara here, Appa looks quite big. Now, obviously, you can tell Appa's a bit smaller than he probably, you know, should be, knowing this, of course. But still, it gets across that the saddle itself is kind of exceptionally small. Like, it's really, 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 really small. And again, the lack of articulation on some of these figures means that it's like very difficult to actually like put the characters in here, like, in any sort of a reasonable way. Given that, again, it's going to be something that people will want to do with this figure, is to, once they collect all of Team Avatar, like all 6 members of Team Avatar, Appa can hold them. It is accurate to the show. Appa can hold all 6 members of Team Avatar. You know, Aang, Katara, Sokka, Toph, Zuko, and Suki can all technically fit in the saddle, as we see in the show. But I think you're going to struggle to fit more than maybe like 2 people in this saddle in any sort of a reasonable pose at all. Just because the articulation is not built at all to put the characters in a sort of sitting pose that sort of collapses them enough to, you know, make them kind of sit down here. So that's the only thing here, is just that the saddle especially, which technically has enough space to probably hold about 10 people realistically. Like, they never really use Appa at full capacity. I think in the Escape from the Invasion is when I think the most amount of people are ever on Appa. And that's like 7 or so people, I think, because you have like Teo, Haru, and the Duke and stuff like that on board as well. But you know, the detailing, as you can see here, is nice. Like, look at the sculpting. Like, they didn't need to do this. And arguably, you can make the case here that it may have been better to just, okay, don't feel the need to be this level of detailed, but just make this flat and make it as wide as possible. That way, you can at least attempt to have a few of the characters, you know, sit here. Because again, the idea is that the full team or at least, you know, when the team had a lower amount of members, 3 or 4 in the earlier seasons, they were all able to technically like sleep on Appa, whereas like Katara can't even like actually lie down here. Now I understand it. If you go off Katara is setting the scale, that means the saddle would have to be sort of by default this wide, like the length of Katara wide, and then enough that like say 6 characters side by side could actually do it. So the idea is that you probably have to like double the size of Appa to actually get the scale properly. I appreciate the attempt. It just means that outside of, I think, a very select amount of poses, you're probably not going to be doing too many dioramas using the whole team. Like, I think it's going to look relatively nice with just the characters maybe like lined up in front of Appa, because he still is big compared to the figures, but the scale obviously is quite off, and the saddle is, I think, what puts it out of the scale the most. Just because, like, I get it's sort of accurate, like this is the way it would be placed on Appa's back, but it should be a little wider. Like it feels like the wall should be coming out from here rather than like in here. And again, it just highlights that the scale is quite heavily off. Like I'd say at least 2 times. But, you know, 2 times this, like it would obviously mean the figure would have to cost like probably 2 or 3 times the amount that it actually does. But I think people will be fine with that, with this level of detail, just so it is accurate. Now, obviously, like I said, this weighs quite a lot. The double the weight of this, you know, you're probably getting like quite heavy there, but you know, it is what it is. But the thing about this, obviously, is just it's impressive as just a piece of plastic. The detail here on all of his legs, they don't move at all. Oh wait, actually no, there's some minor movement in these, but of course you're not enough to get any sort of posing out of it really. It really only feels like, no, are they just tight? Yeah, so these can actually move. They're just a little tight. But again, they're not going to move enough to really make any sort of a difference to your posing. It feels like about the most you can do is just kind of have his sort of toes point in maybe slightly different directions. But overall, it's just to make sure he's always sort of stable on that sort of thing. In terms of the actual articulation, obviously you can see here the head can move. That's cool. So yeah, that's fine. So yeah, there's a bit of up and down as well. So you can see if we just push directly down, the head does go down a bit. If we push up, so yeah, there's kind of swivel and side to side. About what you'd want, like enough to be sort of expressive, where like if you want him posed to the side but just looking over this way, you can do it. And then you can do sort of similar things. It's definitely molded basically with him looking slightly to the left. You can see just sort of looking straight down the sort of like path of the sort of arrow is that the saddle is sort of like straight down here, but the head is actually pointed like slightly off to the left, which means like it looks a little bit better being posed this way than it does trying to like have him point to the right a little bit. But you know, that's just a sculpt that they've sort of gone for here. That, yeah, you can definitely tell like the pose is kind of built in a way where it's meant to be him looking slightly to the left, and that there's a lot more going on here than there is here. But like I said, the detail's nice. Like look even in the kind of roll up here with all their kind of gear, the sleeping bags and so on. Again, it's got that same stuff that's on the figures of like the fabric texture, which is quite good. And then it's obviously painted quite nicely. Like I said, with the tail, you do have the kind of arrow markings throughout, which is cool. And obviously underneath, then you have kind of his underbelly, of course. Again, very nice. The head, again, there is the mouth. This is sort of the main action features, that the mouth does close. So you can have like full mouth closed, you know, just like slightly open, or you can do the full like he's about to eat Sokka type of pose. There's like some nice detailing here, you know, his nose and the different colors on his face. I definitely like it for sure, and then they have accurate like ears and stuff like that. It's cool. It's definitely cool in that I don't really expect many other companies to do an Appa, just because the higher the scale of figure, the less likely an Appa is to be done. And this is, I guess, as far as they felt they could go with an Appa here. The only thing I would say about this is that like this only costs like what, 25, 22 or 25. I don't think it is completely crazy that they make a bigger one and price it at like 50 or 60. I think the fandom is here for accuracy, and they'd absolutely go for that once it's a little bit more in line with what you would actually want. But like I said, the problem here is just, again, with some of these kind of clothing choices here, you're never going to get this lower section of Katara to pose nicely enough to have her kind of be in a proper sitting down pose, just because it's far too rigid. And until I suppose I get a figure that has a more just normal look with normal clothing, it's hard to get a sense for like if you can actually like really kind of sit them down sort of properly, just because like that's kind of the best you can really do. And it just, you could tell it is Katara being way bigger than she actually is here. And again, with the idea that typically Aang often actually flies Appa from the front, like especially when Appa has his armor on in the invasion, he has that little kind of slot over his head for Aang to sit on. The idea is that like he just like is relatively small on Appa's head, but Katara is kind of very big on Appa's head. So yeah, it's the scale is definitely the problem. Otherwise, this is incredible. I really do like this. That even if I'd honestly say that like even if you're not interested in the McFarlane figures, just the uniqueness of there being a nice looking Appa figure out there, even if it's not really to scale with anything else you have, is quite cool. It's to the point now where I almost kind of wish that like, could they release like figures that are the right scale? Even if they're just little statue things that don't move, just so you could actually place a correctly scaled version of each of the team members in the back of this Appa. Because when we do have six characters are not fitting in this figure, like, at all. In no way are six characters fitting here. So that's the big thing. Like, here's Aang from the old Toyline, which is, you know, roughly the same scale, give or take. Even trying to just put two there, they completely take up the entire volume of the saddle. So the scale isn't going to work. So there's that. Final comparison, I suppose. Let's just do it between some of the other animals. So here is Fang from the old Toyline. Where I'm hoping they actually do a dragon at some point in this Toyline, because at least in me, these animal ones were probably some of the more memorable ones from the previous Toyline. Like even if they have to do it more like the Appa, where it maybe doesn't even have this level of articulation, seeing a dragon done with this level of sort of surface detail sculpting, I think would look absolutely incredible. Now, obviously, I prefer it to be more of like the physical dragon rather than the spirit Fang form that this one is. But still, you know, they did a decent job back in like 2005. I can only imagine what they're capable of doing now, especially because I think on all the listings it was listed as sort of the like beast assortment or something like that. So I think the intent is probably that we will see other animals. At the very least, I'd hope they do a dragon and a badger mole to go alongside Appa here. Who knows? Does Aang come with a Momo in any? I assume I haven't really looked at the figures in a while. I think one of the Aangs comes with a Momo. But you know, just the bigger animals, they're the ones I think you probably should cover. Yeah, I guess a Komodo Rhino as well. Like, it already actually looks okay here next to some of these other ones from the old toy line. The big difference is, of course, like the skin of the rhino. They've tried to give it across that texture that a rhino maybe should have, but it's still rather just smooth plastic with just a few little kind of dents in it. Nowhere near the level of this detail. So, you know, it just highlights that the big thing that I'm probably excited for with this line, I think even more so now, especially now after having one of the figures in hand and this scale in hand, is that this, I think, is the highlight. This bigger animal scale is the highlight. I hope they do more of these, definitely. In that, I'll be honest, like the figure was just sort of like, yeah, it's good. That's really all I feel like the main review of it there is to say. But there's actually like, yeah, this is super cool. This figure is really, really awesome. So at least right now, based off just the sort of one of the figures and the Appa, this has pretty high marks from me. Just not in the sense of it being the sort of animal scale to go with these figures, but just as an individual figure, I think it looks really, really, really impressive. Super impressive. Just as like, yeah, the best Appa figure we've ever had. Look at that. And again, the weight, the quality feels like it's absolutely there. And the fact that it is only like just over $20, it's pretty good value overall, because like this costs 10, and it's like, do you buy 2.5 figures or this chunk of plastic? This is where the value is, I think. But yeah, that has been the video. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the Appa if you have it. But other than that, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.